There is a particular kind of hurt that doesn't show on your skin, but settles in your chest like a quiet, permanent ache. The kind that comes from being loved by someone who made you feel hard to love. Someone whose actions, or silence, or inconsistency slowly carved into you the belief that you were asking for too much, wanting too deeply, needing too honestly, feeling too intensely. You didn't start out believing that something was wrong with you. You learned it, moment by moment, through the way someone else handled your heart. When you reached for closeness and they responded with distance. When you opened up and they shut down. When you tried to meet them in the middle and they moved further away. When you offered transparency and they offered confusion. When you tried to build something and they tried to avoid it. Those experiences didn't just hurt, they rewired something inside you. They taught you to question your worth. They taught you to doubt your lovability. They taught you to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. Healing from this kind of hurt isn't about forgetting the person. It's about reclaiming the pieces of yourself you abandoned while trying to be loved by them. It starts with understanding that the way they loved you was a reflection of their emotional capacity, not a measurement of your worth. People can only meet you at the depth they have met themselves, and if they have never explored their own wounds, their own fears, their own shadows, they cannot hold space for your heart, no matter how much they like you or care about you. Their avoidance, their coldness, their inconsistency, their emotional unavailability, none of that originated from you. It came from the stories they carry within themselves. Stories rooted in childhood moments where love felt dangerous, or inconsistent, or unreliable. Stories where vulnerability led to disappointment. Stories where needing someone meant being hurt. So they learned to love by staying distant. They learned to protect themselves by disconnecting. They learned to survive by suppressing. And you, with your open heart and your genuine presence, walked into their life carrying everything they had spent years avoiding. Intimacy, honesty, emotional depth, connection. You weren't too much. You were simply more than they were capable of handling. But because their emotional limits didn't match your emotional capacity, you started believing something was wrong with you, instead of realizing something was unhealed in them. Healing begins when you stop personalizing their limitations, when you stop confusing their avoidance with your inadequacy, when you stop interpreting their silence as confirmation of your unworthiness. They didn't make you hard to love because you are. They made you feel hard to love because they don't know how to love deeply. And if you look closely at the moments where you felt most rejected, you will see that those were the moments where you were the most vulnerable, the most authentic, the most emotionally open. You weren't being rejected. You were being mishandled by someone who didn't have the capacity to receive you. And that distinction matters because it tells you that the part of you that was hurt is not the part of you that was wrong. It's the part of you that was brave, the part that dared to love, the part that dared to hope, the part that dared to show up, the part that dared to give more than you had ever received. Healing means honoring that part instead of punishing it. It means recognizing that the version of you who tried wasn't foolish. They were courageous. They loved someone who didn't know how to love themselves. They offered safety to someone who only understood survival. They offered depth to someone drowning in their own emotional shallowness. They offered consistency to someone who had never experienced it. And because of that mismatch in emotional worlds, you were left with the impression that you were the problem. But you weren't. The problem was the emotional gap between you. You were loving with your whole heart. They were loving with their fear. You were reaching with clarity. They were reacting with panic. You were leaning in. They were pulling away. And the more you tried to bridge that distance, the more you internalized their inability as evidence that you were somehow difficult, demanding, or unlovable. Healing requires rewriting that narrative. It requires telling yourself the truth they couldn't give you. The truth that you were never hard to love. You were just loving someone who wasn't ready. Someone who didn't have the tools. Someone who didn't have the emotional grounding. Someone who mistook your softness for danger because they had never felt safe before. Someone who mistook your openness for pressure because vulnerability felt suffocating to them. Someone who mistook your love for a demand because they had no experience being loved without conditions. And so they made you feel like the problem, not because you were, but because they couldn't face their own wounds. Healing is not about blaming them. It's about understanding what happened so you can finally put the weight down. It's about seeing that the way they treated you says nothing about your worth and everything about their fear. It's about recognizing that someone else's emotional paralysis is not a reflection of your value. It's about taking back the parts of you that you silenced while trying to be easier to love. Healing means letting your heart breathe again after holding it tight for so long. And it begins with the smallest internal shift, believing that you did not deserve the version of love that hurt you. Believing that love is not supposed to confuse you. Believing that affection is not supposed to feel inconsistent. Believing that you are allowed to want and need and feel without apologizing. Believing that there is nothing wrong with craving connection. Believing that your depth is not a flaw. It is a language. And the people who made you feel hard to love were simply people who could not speak that language. People who looked at the vastness inside you and felt their own emotional smallness. People who mistook your courage for intensity because they have never let themselves feel deeply. People who interpreted your desire for connection as pressure because connection has always frightened them. You were not asking for too much. You were asking the wrong person. The wrong person makes you feel like you are difficult because your very existence challenges their emotional limits. The right person will make you feel like breathing. Healing is not about pretending you were never hurt. It is about letting that hurt guide you back to yourself. When someone makes you feel hard to love, the injury doesn't heal on its own because it wasn't a surface wound. It was a distortion of your identity. You didn't just get hurt. You were changed. You began to anticipate rejection even where there was none. You began to silence your needs before anyone asked you to. You began to apologize for your emotions before they had the chance to be expressed. You began to shrink your presence to avoid being too much. You began to expect abandonment even when someone showed up. You began to distrust affection, attention, and consistency. The damage wasn't just what they did. It was what you began to do to yourself. Healing means undoing all the ways you abandoned yourself while trying to be enough for someone who couldn't receive you. It means letting your needs exist without guilt. It means letting your emotions come without shame. It means letting your heart expand again without assuming it will be punished. It means relearning what love feels like when it doesn't hurt. Because love, true love, doesn't make you feel like you're walking on glass. It doesn't make you question your worth at every turn. It doesn't make you earn affection. It doesn't punish you for having a heart. It doesn't ask you to dilute yourself. It doesn't push you into silence. Love isn't supposed to feel like survival. And the fact that you loved someone who made you feel small does not mean that you are small. It means they were not big enough to hold what you were offering. Healing also means understanding the emotional mechanics at play. People who make you feel hard to love usually feel unlovable themselves. Their limitations rubbed against your openness. Their insecurities rubbed against your hope. Their fear rubbed against your vulnerability. And because they could not regulate their own emotional discomfort, they displaced it onto you, making you feel like the unstable one, the needy one, the emotional one, the one asking for too much. But the truth is that your needs weren't too big. Their capacity was too small. And you cannot shrink yourself enough to fit inside someone else's wounds. Healing is the moment you finally stop trying. It's the moment you say, I'm done trying to make myself easier to love for someone who doesn't know how to love. It's the moment you release the fantasy that if you were just calmer, quieter, prettier, thinner, stronger, less emotional, more patient, anything, they would have loved you properly. They would not have. Their heart was not built for the kind of love you were offering, and that is not your fault. Healing also means allowing grief to move through you without resistance. Because you are not just grieving the person, you are grieving the version of yourself you became while loving them. You are grieving the self-abandonment. You are grieving the hope. You are grieving the identity you lost. You are grieving the softness you withheld. And you are grieving the possibility that you held on to long after it stopped being real. Let the grief come. Let it break you open. Let it show you what still needs to be held with gentleness. Healing doesn't come from pushing the pain away. It comes from letting the pain speak, letting it show you what has been aching for far too long. And beneath that ache, beneath that longing, beneath that old wound, you will find something you thought you lost. The part of you that still believes in love. Not the naive belief, not the wounded belief, but the belief that love is possible in a way you have not yet experienced. Healing means keeping that belief alive, not for them, but for you. Because what you offer is rare, and what you feel is powerful, and what you carry is something not everyone is capable of receiving. You were never meant to be loved by those who fear the depths you live in. You were meant for someone who can meet you there. Someone who doesn't flinch at your honesty. Someone who doesn't punish your vulnerability. Someone who doesn't disappear when your heart opens. Someone who doesn't mistake your depth for danger. Someone whose nervous system doesn't collapse when they feel close to you. Someone who sees your intensity as beauty, not burden. Someone who meets your softness with their own. Someone who knows how to show up. Healing is not about chasing that person. It's about becoming the version of yourself who recognizes them when they appear. To heal from someone who made you feel hard to love is to reclaim your emotional identity from the hands of someone who never understood it. It is to return every unkind belief they placed on your heart. It is to tell yourself the truth they could not. You are not difficult. You are not too emotional. You are not too much. You are not hard to love. You are simply deep. And deep people can only be loved by those who aren't afraid of drowning. And slowly, with time, you begin to notice something. You start breathing easier. Your chest feels less heavy. Your thoughts feel less sharp. Your memories feel less suffocating. Your heart begins to expand again. You begin to open without fear. You begin to trust your intuition. You begin to feel worthy of the love you crave. You begin to feel like yourself again, not the version you became while bending around someone else's limitations. And one day, without realizing it, you wake up, and the wound that once dictated your every thought has softened into a scar, a reminder of where you have been, not a definition of who you are. Because healing doesn't mean you forget what happened. It means what happened no longer owns you. It means the voice that once whispered, "You're hard to love," is replaced by a quiet truth that feels stronger than anything someone broken ever made you believe. You were never hard to love. You were just loving someone who didn't know how to stay. And now, as you breathe into this new truth, let it settle into your bones. You are allowed to feel again. You are allowed to hope again. You are allowed to open again. You are allowed to trust again. You are allowed to receive again. You are allowed to be loved in a way that doesn't hurt. Welcome back to this space. You're safe here.